Hey y'all, just letting you know that I'm going to be spoiling Moon Knight in this video. If you have not seen this Marvel Studios and Disney Plus show, and you are still planning on watching it and want to remain unspoiled, I'd consider skipping today's video, because I'm about to spoil the whole show. You have been warned. Moon Knight is overall a narratively self-contained affair. As a show existing within the confines of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it rarely, if ever, highlights the broader continuity of the MCU and its various overarching narratives, characters, and plots, and this was honestly by design. In fact, Moon Knight producer Grant Curtis said that character comes first and foremostly, and all other MCU continuityisms are secondary, just like me in conversational group settings. And actors Oscar Isaac and Ethan Hawke echoed this sentiment. As a show, they like how Moon Knight is able to stand alone and be its own thing, mostly separate from the overall MCU drama involving Norse gods, ego-driven wizards, and a talking tree voiced by Vin Diesel. And honestly, I kind of have to agree, truly in its separation, Moon Knight is quite unique. Yet with that being said, Moon Knight isn't 100% self-contained. On a narrative level, there are still a few loose ends that aren't wrapped up by the show's conclusion, meaning that its ending with its aforementioned loose ends still teases a potential second season by default, even though there is nothing close to a confirmation that we will even receive a second go-around with Moon Knight. In fact, the prospect of a Moon Knight Season 2 is up in the air like pizza dough, or whether or not Konami wants to make video games anymore, which is too bad because Moon Knight deserves a second season. As explained in my review, the show's character development of its lead and the positive, albeit streamlined, portrayal of dissociative identity disorder made the show worth watching on its own, and with a follow-up season, there are still interesting narrative avenues potentially worth exploring. Whether we are discussing the show's angles on dissociative identity disorder or certain storytelling resolutions, the series still has a good amount of narrative real estate that it can work with, and due to this, Moon Knight should not be a done deal. It deserves a second season. To explain why this is, allow me to first spoil Moon Knight Season 1. Prior to the third act, the god of the moon Khonshu was imprisoned inside a statue for messing with the natural elements of the world, causing the personality duo that is Mark Spector and Stephen Grant, i.e. American Oscar Isaac and English Oscar Isaac, to search for the statue that imprisoned the Egyptian goddess Ammit, a being who wants to cull all the evil souls on Earth even before they have committed any crimes, all on their own. As heroes, Stephen and Mark wanted to find Ammit's statue before Ethan Hawke's Arthur Harrow did, a man who desires to free Ammit from the statue. But unfortunately, Mark and Stephen weren't fast enough. Arthur catches up with him, puts a bullet in them, and takes the statue. And as a result, Mark and Stephen die and go to the Egyptian afterlife, where they more or less try to figure things out. From there, they learn that Mark's abusive mother was the reason as to why Mark's and Stephen's personalities were split to begin with, and the two team up with the Egyptian goddess Tauret in order to resurrect Mark and Stephen from the dead so that they can combat Harrow and Ammit before they execute their deadly plan. Meanwhile, Layla, Stephen and Mark's love interest, temporarily becomes the avatar of Tauret and frees Khonshu from his prison. And now with Stephen and Mark resurrected, they agree to become Khonshu's avatar one last time in order to stop the Harrow threat. And from there, Mark and Stephen regain their super abilities as Khonshu's Moon Knight, team up with a souped-up Layla, and defeat Ammit and Harrow by binding Ammit directly to Harrow's body. However, Khonshu wasn't entirely satisfied. See, he wanted to kill Ammit and Harrow, but seeing as Khonshu can't do this directly due to reasons of plot, he orders Mark, Stephen, and Layla to do the deed instead, something that our heroes ultimately declined to do. And from there, with their terms of service agreements completed, Mark, Stephen, and Layla become regular, normal people once again. But wait, there's more. Even with that rejection, Khonshu still desired to have Ammit and Harrow killed, and thus he employed a new avatar, Jake Lockley, who is a third Oscar Isaac personality hidden from Mark and Stephen, who has no frets about killing people. And from there, the show ends, with Jake shooting several bullet holes inside Ammit and Harrow. So a lot happened in this series, some of which wasn't fully contained for one whole season of television. There were a couple loose ends, one of which was the alternate personality of Jake Lockley, a character who somewhat undermines the show's otherwise positive portrayal of dissociative identity disorder. See, unlike other forms of media where dissociative identity disorder is villainized, Mark's and Stephen's DID is far more wholesome. The two both have different heroic qualities and personal faults, and that was honestly refreshing because media, especially genre media like superhero stories, don't portray people with dissociative identity disorder with much compassion. DID folks are often villains in fiction, but Moon Knight upended that cliche. Mark and Stephen aren't villainous here. They are two separate yet valid people, and Moon Knight is mostly unique in this more lovely portrayal, because truly when it comes to dissociative identity disorder, Moon Knight is much much better than most other media. Which is why it was so disheartening when the show introduced Jake Lockley, i.e. Mark and Steven's third personality, because to be honest, Jake somewhat negates the show's otherwise positive portrayal of DID. While sure Jake's existence was teased throughout Moon Knight's 6-episode run, his introduction at the tail end of the season left me feeling sour. See, the show's portrayal of dissociative identity disorder worked because it was originally two heroic personalities working in tandem with one another, rather than one who was a protagonist and another who was a cutthroat villain, like in most other media. But sadly, Jake Lockley devalues that positive point because now Mark and Steven may be housing a villainous and violent personality, just like all those other problematic portrayals of dissociative identity disorder in genre media. The types of portrayals that Mark and Steven were originally separate from, but now aren't because of Jake Lockley. They now have a parallel to those bad dissociative identity disorder depictions. And look, I don't know how this will play out in a potential season 2 or a certain continuation of this narrative. I'm mostly unfamiliar with Moon Knight's comics and Jake Lockley as one of Mark and Steven's alters. I don't know if Jake will eventually become an ally to Mark and Steven or become an adversary, but that's all the more reason as to why there needs to be a second season of Moon Knight. I want to see how this show potentially handles this unsavory scenario that at least appears to cast Mark and Steven's dissociative identity disorder in a problematic light, and for that reason, the story deserves to continue. Khonshu is another reason as to why Moon Knight deserves a second season. As a character, Khonshu is prone to tantrums and takes advantage of the mentally ill Mark and Steven for his own benefit. He's not a very good guy, hence why Mark and Steven split from Khonshu once they saved the world. And honestly, I can't blame them. Khonshu is about as toxic and exploitative as an executive at Activision Blizzard. He's kind of Moon Knight's hidden villain. And while sure, Harrow and Amit are clearly Moon Knight Season 1's main antagonists, Khonshu is definitely manipulative and just kind of an overall asshole. One that honestly deserves some comeuppance. But the show doesn't deliver any sort of resolution to Khonshu's deplorable behavior. If anything, Moon Knight just ends with Khonshu still taking advantage of Mark and Steven. It overall concludes in an open-ended fashion. And admittedly, I get that this was probably by design. The showrunners and the writers likely wanted to leave their options open just in case Moon Knight was greenlit for a season 2, or for these characters to be utilized in other MCU projects, but I'm not sure how likely that is given that Oscar Isaac believed that Moon Knight's minimal crossover with the Marvel Cinematic Universe was a big selling point. And with that, it only makes sense that the showrunners and the writers would leave narrative space for a potential second season of Moon Knight, a second season that I really hope happens, because there is still a lot of narrative ground that can be covered. It has a very engaging character dynamic, and has a fair few loose ends that should be shored up in a potential sequel, because ironically, Moon Knight Season 1 isn't entirely contained. Whether we are discussing the dissociative identity disorder angle or the characterization of Khonshu, Moon Knight still has a lot of narrative angles worth exploring, and due to this, Moon Knight really deserves a second season. It needs a second go-around, because as it is, Moon Knight as a story doesn't feel 100% complete. And with that, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like rating, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me whether or not you'd like to see a second season of Moon Knight. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon page. $1 a month gets you onto my Discord server, and $5 a month allows you to start making review requests. The link to my Patreon is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to thank my patrons, particularly my high tier ones in David, Samantha, Devlin, Mom, and Morgan. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.